Hi, Rick again for EDU Mobile Academy. This demo is about segueing out to a collection of page controllers. Now, page controllers are really just WK interface controllers, but they're hooked up as pages. Now, when we're doing the segue needs to segue out to a collection of WK interface controller objects. They need to be connected by page segues. So we see that in our each of these segues is a page segue, and I'll delete them so that we can see. In fact, I'm going to delete all of the segues here so that we can see how to connect these up. So the first step here is to connect all of our page controllers with page segues, and these are relationship segues. Now, when I do this, I don't need to drag from a button because it's a page-based collection. What I do need to do is control, click, and drag from the first page to the next, and we see a relationship segue pop up here. Next page is the only selection open for us, and this we can see has created a relationship next page from this controller to this controller. Likewise, we connect the next two controllers and so forth for each page in your page-based collection. Now, the first page of that collection needs to be connected to whatever we are segueing from. In this case, the button in the first interface, and let's give it a little bit better name than button. We'll just call this segue. All right. Now we're going to segue from this button to the first page, and we'll do that by control clicking and dragging from the button to this controller, releasing, and then selecting Modal. We could select push, and if we did that, our application would not work. We would push out to a controller, but it would be empty. We need to make that segue, and if you do this, you can change the type of segue from push to modal right here. This needs to be a modal segue. It must be a modal segue if we are segueing to a page-based collection. We cannot push to a page-based collection. All right, so now in our interface controller, we handle this push out to our page controller. And by the way, our page controllers are all instances of the page controller class. So if I look at this one, and this one, and this one, I see that these are all page controllers. Page controller has been defined here, and we'll look at that here in just a moment. Let's look at our root controller, the segue, or the controller we are segueing from. So I don't have a label here. I skipped that part. I'm just simplifying it, and all we're showing here is really the override of the contexts for segue with identifier. Multiple contexts will be returned from this method. So here we are. We get the segue identifier. Now, I've called the segue identifier pages. So because I deleted that segue, I'm going to have to recreate that here in segue by selecting the segue and then going to the attribute inspector and typing in the identifier, pages. So now, let's go back. We'll save that. Let's go back. And we check to see if that segue identifier is pages. We set up a context to return, and this is any object, as an array of any object, I should say, as an optional. So if the segue identifier is pages, then my context is first page, second page, third page, and these will be used to populate the labels on the pages. Now, I have three contexts that I'm passing in the array, and I have three pages, page controllers, in Interface Builder in my storyboard. The numbers have to be the same as we talked about. Otherwise, it won't work. That would be bad. All right, so three contexts, three controllers. Finally, I return context. And if pages was the identifier, the context will be this array of three strings, first page, second page, third page. And this array, each member will correspond to the identifier in the same order that we hooked them up in the segue. So we return that context. Now, if the identifier is not pages, we are returning nil. So when we get over to the page controller, and here I'll show you that, we get over to the page controller, we get awake with context. We have label page defined as an outlet, WK interface label explicitly unwrapped again, and we call through to super in awake with context. And then finally, we set the text label of label page to context as, not as, but as, which is as question mark, which says, if this is not nil, make it a string, or downcast this any object as a string. Otherwise, don't do it. So if you have a label at that position of the array for this particular page controller, take that label and set LB Pages text accordingly. So now when we run, it works. So here we have our button, segue, and it's a modal segue. We have first page, second page, third page, and it all works. And even if we're on the second or third page, we can cancel and dismiss our modal segue. All right, one other thing I wanted to show you is, remember I said that a push segue would not work. Let's go ahead and see that. We'll change our segue type here to push, rerun the application, and when we click on the segue, we see that we have a blank interface controller here. And this is what will happen. We don't even have pages here. We just pushed out to nothing, sort of, just a blank interface controller. So if this happens when you expect a modal segue to come up with page-based content, make sure that the type of the segue is set to modal, not push. Thank you very much.